So welcome to attending this this free webinar. It is the first time we've tried anything like this, so I do hope it goes well. You know, it's a bit like amateur hour, but we'll see how we go. I'm just going to give a quick introduction to what's going to be going on today, and then introduce you to your speakers. They're going to have so basically all the speakers do a quick short presentation each, 5 to 10 minutes. And then we're going to open the floor for Q&A. So it's as simple as that, really, just talking about their experiences and then having questions and seeing where we can answer it. The webinar is being recorded and it will be uploaded to the RACI website later. So no problem there. And really today, what we are going to cover is how COVID-19 is affecting our pharmaceutical industry. So it is specific to that, how workplaces are carrying on, all the things that go with that. Some of the things we're not covering today, we're not really covering the science of COVID-19, how you contract and spread the virus, medical treatments, vaccines, you know, those kind of things, the medical things. Really, I'd point everybody to WHO guidelines or Australian government and health guidelines on those types of things. That's really not what we're covering today. It's really to do with how we can keep moving on as a pharmaceutical industry. Then what we'll do is, as we're going through, please put questions in all the way through the seminar. So we're going to use the Q&A function. We're not going to use the raise hand function in Zoom, which will just get a bit confusing, but we'll use the Q&A function. So down in the bar, you'll be able to see Q&A and you can ask a question. So all answered questions will be visible to everybody, and all of your questions will be visible. If you would like to make it anonymous, you can for a question. You don't have to give your name. That's no problem at all. And I'll try and bring the similar themes together so we can go through questions and get the panel to answer those for you. Today's speakers, as advertised, are Gary from AstraZeneca, then Rebecca will be speaking from Merck. We have Alan from Chemica and Jennifer from Eurofins. So really looking at each aspect. What I'll do is I'll get each speaker to just basically introduce themselves at the beginning of their talk in a row, and then we'll go through it in that order. So we'll do all the talks first, and then we'll have questions and answers afterwards. And I'll just quickly talk about it now. We are looking at doing some other webinar topics in the future, where we will look maybe at the science of COVID, how it sits on surfaces, some medicinal chemistry with the antiviral drugs, what soap does, physical chemistry of it, UV exposure, those types of things. So, you know, we'll keep you posted on those, but they will be the future ones coming a bit later on. So without further ado, what I'll do is I'll pass over to Gary to introduce himself and do his first talk. And I'm just going to put his presentation on the screen for you all.
Okay, thanks, Scott. So my name is Gary Lates. I'm the procurement lead for Esthers Intercellular. Just a brief overview of Astra. So obviously we're a pharmaceutical company. Predominantly 95% of our business is with China. We are a 24/7 manufacturing facility. Okay, and we've got about 600 people on site. Okay, next slide, Scott, thank you. Okay, I guess I'll just the challenges of COVID and just give some timelines of when it's first originated, or when we were, I guess, aware of the issues. So back in early January, factories in China started shutting down, and that included the AstraZeneca Wuxi site. Learning from that Wuxi site with potential supply issues as borders were closing within the China. Local AstraZeneca team knew about the COVID, but at that time, not many people understood or anticipated the magnitude of that impact. So I guess we're still a bit easy going at that stage. However, come late January, we're hit, I guess, a bit of a more of a panic mode, whereby the procurement team and supply chain team locally, we started working with our vendors, just bring orders forward in China and also in Europe. And luckily, it was before the European countries started to close the borders. around the second week of Feb, what we did was we formed what we call an issue management team, pretty much similar to a rapid response team, which discussed the handling of the COVID and supply issues. We also started collaboration with suppliers, with vendors to work with the impacts of their business as well. So, for example, if some of the smaller vendors were having problems with bringing orders for air freighting, we were able to help, as we had global accounts with our freight forwarders, which really helped. Okay, so around in March, COVID became a part of our business, day-to-day business discussions. We had frequent discussions with vendors to work out any potential impact in terms of their resources, financial stress. If where we could, we can help, especially like in terms of payment terms with those smaller vendors. Was a daily report on the issue management team to flag any supply issues. And majority of the people were working from home where possible, predominantly obviously the office workers, but we do also have the operators who still need to go into the site to obviously operate on the machines and all that. And again, social distancing plays a part there as well. So we implemented measures there whereby the operators need to be 1.5 meters apart from each other. Okay, moving to the next slide, Scott. I guess some of the lessons learned so far, we learned from our colleagues in China, from their experience and their ability to solve problems pretty quickly. So that really helped us with their sharing the best practices. We also looked at helping vendors overcome some of the delivery issues. They may be required to equip to leverage some of the 3PL providers like AZ. Having a clear structure of communications and the ways of working. And to that point is we also have to be very careful in how we manage the workload to protect those people on site. It was very easy to get caught up with our day-to-day with multiple meetings that covering the same topics. So again, it goes back to having a clear structure of communications, and which really helped. And lastly, just be aware of the global events and changes that was constantly happening, and for us to keep monitoring the supply chain in any hotspots. Okay, that's it, Scott.
Thank you, Gary. That's excellent. We'll move straight on to Rebecca's presentation. So just give me 1 second just to bring that up. Is that all there for you, Rebecca? Does that look okay?
Terrific. Thank you very much, Scott. Hello, everybody. It's really nice to be here with you today. So my name is Rebecca Lee. I'm the Managing Director of Merck Life Science. I had the pleasure of joining 5 weeks ago. So you can imagine it's been an interesting roller coaster, but I've come out of the chemical industry. I've spent a lot of my time working for one of the companies that spun out of Bayer. So the company was called Covestro, and it was part of the Bayer organization. So the biological part of the business here is new to me, but it's certainly a very exciting time. So we can move on. I thought that today I'd give you a bit of an introduction into who Merck is, for those who don't know, and then also just go into talking about what we're doing from a company, a life science company. So next one, thanks, Scott. So just an indication of who Merck are in the life science business. We are probably one of the world's oldest chemical companies. We started in 1668 in Darmstadt in Germany, and still involved, I guess, very much so in the pharmaceutical and as well in the life science space. Life science as a particular business unit is around €6 billion. But we are very well spread out across the world, dealing with a lot of different materials, but essentially our catchphrase is we're really enabling the scientific community. Some of you will know our brands like Sigma Aldrich and Millipore, and we're, I guess, a company with a range of brands that have come together to be where we are today across the world. Next slide, thanks. So life science in particular has 3 focus areas. One of those is really our research business, where we're supplying materials into research laboratories. And that's all things from those chemical reagents through to biological products. We have a process solutions business, which then is really in the drug manufacturing. So it's about providing products at high standards and purity standards that really help ensure the purity as well as the regulatory compliance end to end. Then we have an applied business, which is slightly different because we're dealing then in the diagnostic space and all things supplying materials to pathology laboratories, but also many of you may be aware of, we have a really strong brand called Millicue, which is about supplying lab water. And again, that pure, clean water that's needed in a laboratory. So because of our reach, we have manufacturing around the world, and this gives us a really unique position in this space. Next slide, thanks. So with our product range, we certainly have a number of products that are there that are essential in supporting what's going on with the response to COVID right now. So from the research side of things, we're working with researchers on developing vaccines through to the testing that I was saying before with regards to pathology laboratories. So really our product portfolio is then quite well placed to be able to be part of this fight against the virus. We're also certainly working with our global communities around this crisis, ensuring that we have enough provisions for them, but also taking care at the same time, as Gary was saying, taking care of our people. We have 22,000 employees around the world. Obviously, at a business like ours, we're still operating, and it's then how do we manage that to enable our people to still continue, but also understanding the pressures that are on them. And given a global situation, it's really around how do we maintain our production facilities and distribution points at this time. Next slide. So what are we doing in terms of people? So as most sites have done, we've looked at de-densification, so A and B teams where we need to have supply chains operating, obviously social distancing where that comes in. For example, I mentioned lab water. Teams there are still having to go into laboratories to do maintenance and do some troubleshooting. So really we're providing them sufficient PPE. But of course, where we have people still in offices, in production facilities, in laboratories, of course, it's trying to keep those facilities as clean as possible. So safety has been one of the key drivers in the decisions that we've been making. What's interesting for the company like ours with a global presence is really being able to leverage the digital tools that are around. As I said, we enable the scientific community. Part of that is also ensuring that they know how to use our products, that we can provide some assistance in the research that's going on. And so we've had some quite successful virtual sort of webinars with our teams across the world, but also then with our customers to help them to work through issues and work through solutions, because as we all know, I think everyone is facing the challenges with this virus today the same way. Next slide, thanks. From a production point of view, obviously we have we've got 59 manufacturing sites around the world, and we are ramping up where we can at those sites because we're supplying some critical materials that go into the vaccine development, virus characterizations. We know that there is some high demand in our products. So certainly being able to ramp up production where we can, as well as making sure those distribution centres are sufficiently stocked. Now, part of the challenge has been that, as we know, air travel has almost but ceased. There is some cargo lines going at the moment, but we're working really closely with our service providers to find different routes. There were some challenges coming from Europe, but we've been able to find some alternate routes that we can enable air freight to still come in. Obviously, passenger aircraft makes up a big part of the freight that we do. So looking at what cargo is around, what air cargo as well as sea cargo. So I guess it's dealing with issues that come up and trying to find some creative solutions around it. Next slide. So I mentioned a little bit about where our products sit, obviously in the detection of the virus. You've heard a lot recently around the decision from the health departments across Australia around homebrew kits, and really the opportunity for us to ramp up our own local production capabilities. So we're certainly working with the health departments on how we can provide that. There's some materials that we have that we can support to I guess, develop our own local technology in that space. Characterization, as you heard, we've got some real leading laboratories in Australia that are at the forefront, which is, I have to say, really exciting, and as an Australian, to see that we are leading in some aspects. And so we've been very careful to make sure that we're supplying materials that are still going into those laboratories to enable them to continue to do what they're doing, as well then of course in the vaccine production and the drug trials that are going on. Next slide. So in terms of our response, I guess what we're trying to do is leverage the values that we have as an organisation with a history like 350 plus years. We've come from a point where we really care about not only our people, but also our community, which is including our customers and researchers. So we really feel that we have a strong responsibility at this time to help enable the search for vaccines, the search for drugs that suit to address the virus, as well as to continue to do the testing that we need to do to manage and to monitor, I guess, the spread. So really involved in a lot of programs at the moment on a local and a global level, supporting in terms of protective equipment to the frontline workers, and really doing quite a fair bit of work in that diagnostics and manufacture space. But we don't just think about our direct community. Obviously, we're a science company. We have an ambition to be a vibrant company, and that's including taking some experiences that we can bring home. So we have a concept around curiosity labs, which are running small experiments that we all know people are at home doing sort of homeschooling with their children. So we've been sharing a lot of these little lessons around science that we would hope that some mums and dads would be happy to share with their kids. And of course, continuing our support of the STEM initiatives that are out there, and really pushing forward on promoting science as a key solution provider to the situation we have today. So thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Excellent stuff. So next, Jennifer's going to speak, and she's from Eurofins. So I'm just going to put a presentation up for you. Hopefully that all looks good.
Yep, that's the one. Thanks, Scott, and thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, so at Eurofins, we're active in a number of countries, and where we've sort of, I suppose, have borne the brunt of some of the really serious impacts of COVID-19 in the countries that we operate on. So I just wanted to share some of the experiences that we've had in those countries today. Next slide. Thanks, Scott. Oh, one back. So just to give you an idea of the footprint, and again, I'm only talking about the biopharma product testing group here at the moment. We're active in a number of other business lines, but this is really about sort of where we are in terms of the pharmaceutical industry. So as you can see, we've got a pretty extensive footprint in Europe and across the US as well. So we've got about 35 laboratory locations. In addition to our own internal laboratories, we also have an insourcing service where we have a number of our trained staff. There's about a contingent of around 2,500 people at the moment who are working in our client sites. So For various reasons, clients will prefer that the work is undertaken in their own manufacturing facilities. So in addition, I suppose, to working through our own response to COVID, we've also been working actively on client sites and sort of fitting in with their own responses and requirements as well. Next slide, thanks, Scott. So I think there's some irony in the fact that we're all actually at the end of January and early February over in Brussels for our annual leadership meeting, when we started to see the first impacts of this new virus coming out. So we'd had some of our colleagues that were travelling from China had opted out or could no longer travel to Europe for our meeting. And then we saw a knock-on of bans making travel obviously a big issue for us all. Probably one of our first and most affected labs outside of China was actually in Milan in Italy. So we have a pretty large site there, about 160 operators on site. We provide a range of testing from raw material, finished products, chemistry, microbiological and toxicological evaluations. And things got pretty serious pretty quickly over there, and obviously we had a number of staff there. They've all got families. The schools were closed within a matter of days of this happening. So obviously our plans were made pretty quickly over in Milan, but thankfully they were able to continue on, and to this day they've actually had no personal impact at that site. So the guys have just done a fantastic job in terms of being able to continue to safely operate in the laboratory environment. And we've seen a number of different responses. I suppose we're having these weekly phone calls with colleagues over in Europe and the US. It was just astounding, you know, across Europe, the number of different experiences and reactions that governments were taking, you know, to this challenge. In terms of our colleagues in Sweden are like, what do you mean? We're still going to the pub after work. You know, to people in France and Italy who, you know, are having to borrow their neighbour's dog to get out and have an excuse to exercise. So it's been quite varied in the responses over there. And then I think, you know, something that we have been thankful for, and I'm sure a lot of our customers have been thankful for as well, is that all of our laboratories have actually been able to continue to operate with the support and the approval from local government authorities. All of our labs, except for one very small group of laboratories, which were the cosmetic clinical evaluation labs, have remained open. But obviously, those labs, there's a lot of interaction between the test subjects and the staff that work there. So they had to sort of shut down when the beauty parlours and the hairdressers closed up shop as well. Next slide, thanks, Scott. Over in the US, that's, I mean, everyone's sort of seen daily what's happening over there. And the US, you know, the term united is, has been really confusing listening to what's happened state to state over there. Again, you know, there's been a really diverse reaction in the states from, you know, each of the local governments in terms of the shelter in place orders over in New Jersey and New York, and on the West Coast in California as well. And then some of our southern states have really had minimal, you know, requests or mandates from their governors in terms of the modifications that they've had to put in place. Again, we're fortunate that all of our laboratory operations were deemed as essential services, and we've been able to continue to operate over there. You know, the same as everyone else, we've tried as much as we can to reduce the number of people that are on site through provision of staff, of shifts. We've got 2 or 3 different what we've called sort of redundant sub-teams who are operating on separate shifts each day. So the idea is that if there is an infection impact in one of the teams, the other 2 teams continue to operate without interruption. I think one of our businesses that have probably been significantly impacted over in the US at the moment is the clinical trials business. And as Rebecca alluded to before, you know, there's big disruptions to freight at the moment, and that is having a real impact on organisations who are relying upon freight services to get their products out to patients. And also not just the logistics, but the willingness of participants, the willingness and ability for them to actually leave their house to participate, in these medical procedures as well. Over in the US, differently to Europe, we've actually had quite a number of our staff that have been either impacted themselves with infections or their family members as well. And actually our colleagues from Pennsylvania yesterday announced to us that their local advice from the CDC was that even if people are testing positive now that they're ramping up the testing numbers, that unless they're unwell, there's actually no recommendation for them to self-isolate anymore. So, it's almost as if they've sort of thrown up their hands and gone, we're just going to move forward regardless of what's happening, which is really quite frightening, I think, for us in Australia and New Zealand, where we've really got very little disease activity down here. So, I think the silver lining certainly for us in the Australia and New Zealand in backyard is sort of we've almost had the benefit of hindsight. So when we were going through and setting up our local COVID response plans, we were talking to the guys in the US and Europe and saying, in 2 weeks' time, where do we imagine we're going to be? So I think, we did have really fantastic support from the guys over there, but, now we're sort of at the point where, as Gary was saying, this is very much our day-to-day life. We're just living in this existence at the moment and really getting on with the work. Next slide. Thanks, Scott. So I think even though the EU and the US was the topic, one surprising place I think has been what's happened over in New Zealand. The country is almost ground to a halt effectively, although just on at the beginning of this week they've made decisions to sort of open up some activities as well. But over in New Zealand, we actually had to go to the Ministry of Health in order to get approval to remain open. And to have our staff coming on site each day for work, to the point where we actually had a few of our sites up on the Northern Island were audited by a government authority to make sure that we had been able to implement the social distancing measures, and other risk mitigation that was required to be put in place to continue to operate. So that's been a big surprise over in New Zealand, just sort of how how much they have shut it down. And I think just the last slide, thanks, Scott. So I guess, one interesting thing is where all this is going to go and, what changes we're perhaps going to keep and continue on, after this event dies down eventually. And one of the interesting things is that now we're seeing over in the US and the EU is that things are really starting to open up quite quickly. And, I'm wondering whether or not, because they've sort of got this, prevalence of disease, they'll be able to open up their borders potentially faster than what we will in Australia and New Zealand, because we just won't have that immunity down here. And, we've taken this path of very tight control. So I think, certainly the changes, we've all accepted them now, and it's just a matter of getting on with the day-to-day life and, remote working and all of the challenges that it has. It's become the norm for some parts of the operation, but certainly, there's a lot of our staff who are on the bench and in clean rooms. Obviously, they're still coming into work every day, and we need to make sure that they're there and being supported. I think we'll have our first experience next week in one of our laboratories. We've got the TGA doing a remote audit for the week. So it's a learning curve for them and for us, and we'll see how it goes at the end of next week. But certainly some big changes for all of us. And that's it for me. Thanks.
Thanks, Jennifer. That's wonderful. Moving on to Alan, if you'd like to share your screen, Alan, and we'll just check it's all looking good.
Okay, I think you have to stop sharing your screen, Scott, before
Okay.
I can do that. Fantastic. Okay, we can see this. Okay, so just to provide you all with a bit of background here, we're I would hope that quite a number of you would have heard of us before, but we're a small commercial laboratory. We employ about 20 people. Based in Sydney, we have a small office in Melbourne as well, but on about 800 square metres. So I guess from what I'm presenting here, you'll get the perspective of the approach we've taken to make sure that we've we can stay operating and keep our people safe. But I think it's probably quite transferable to any small laboratory servicing a company or any other small business impacted by COVID. Now you'll notice here that's not actually a typo there. I just think that that's a reflection on what it feels like at the moment. April seems to be a particularly long month. So when I prepare this, the thing to keep in mind is that we did move extremely quickly, and as a small business we can do that. And it was quite difficult, as you can all imagine, because it was pretty much watching the Prime Minister's press conference at 9 p.m. and then having to work out what you're going to do the next day. So the approach we took was that act and implement quickly, and we even said at the start, we don't think this is going to work. But the idea is that we wanted to get everything ironed out by the time, that moment, which hopefully never comes to, where there's widespread community transmission. Because once it gets to that stage, we've got to have everything fine-tuned. So what we're seeing here is a few iterations along the way to come up with something that's worked for us. So looking what I'm talking about today, just what went on and what we found out to be the issues that we're dealing with. I mean, the number one, of course, is keeping our staff and their families safe. We've got a spread of ages. Many people are living with aged relatives, so we really have to think about that. Planning for continuous operation. I mean, we have a responsibility to remain functioning, as does anyone in the supply chain in the pharmaceutical industry. So we take that responsibility quite seriously, that really it just isn't an option that we will be shut down for a couple of weeks. Then also, I suppose being a small business, you had a lot of contact with staff at quite a personal level. And then you've got this issue of what happens with people when they actually have nothing to do except go to work. So what we try to do to try and just keep people work ready so that they're just not at work, but they're at work and doing their best as well. And then finally, I guess just coming back stronger, because there's certainly some opportunities at the moment. There's a lull. The government's giving some good support, so we can see what we can do so that when we come out of this at the end, we'll be in a better position than where we were going in. So I guess keeping staff safe. I mean, the first thing we looked at quite early was looking at external access. By that I mean really it's couriers and also service personnel. And then also reorganising the way we do things to allow for social distancing. And I suppose the obvious things that we even see in the supermarket at the moment is with plenty of hand sanitisers, surface antivirals available, and also gloves, where that's the most convenient way for people to look after themselves. So I guess with many people, we've gone to no contact deliveries. So if you send us a sample, this is what happens at the moment. So that's time-stamped CCTV notified by intercom. So, and then if it's a lab-based material, like if it's a reagents for the lab gets paged to come and collect. If it's sample receipt, then it's collected by the sample receipt staff. We've seen this everywhere. Labelling, lines on floors, passageways which are narrower than a certain width are labelled so that people don't have to squeeze past each other. And this is actually my office, which is no longer my office. So I guess my biggest problem might be actually getting it back once all of this is over. When it came down to it, we wanted to really spread people out, and I really didn't need to be on site, and there's other reasons for me not to be on site. And my office was, it was about to be subdivided into more, but it's quite a big airy space, so it's ideal. We can put, you know, about 4 or 5 people in there and still maintain a good, safe working environment. Okay, and then the other thing is deliveries. I mean, that initially this worried us a bit because we found out it was quite difficult to control it, and really to some extent you were it depended on the organisation that was coming in whether they really acknowledged it as a problem. I mean, in this case, they're a calibration organisation, and they're used to access controls, but I mean, for other people, they're not so used to it. So what we do now is that for every single person who comes on site, it's planned. So we know exactly the time they're going to be there, because we only want to have them to have contact with one group of people. We have a contact person. We define how they access the lab, where the service is, and also the group of people who they will have contact with. So it's all controlled, and we don't have a situation where it's very hard in the space of 30 seconds to explain to someone where they can and can't go. So you really have to have it organised before people arrive on site. So continuous operation, I mean, that really, in some ways, this is similar to keeping everyone safe. And I guess the example that we're trying to avoid is this, which happened just last week or a couple of weeks ago, where we have a single COVID positive person on staff, which means that the entire staff goes into quarantine. So as you can imagine, we have to do everything we can to minimise the chances of that happening. So what we've done is we've split into 2 work groups. Each of those work 5 hours in the lab, and they work 2.5 hours in dedicated write-up areas. The write-up areas are actually shared and cleaned down between swapping over. And when people swap over, they actually take their keyboards and mice with them. So by having that little bit of overlap in time, but still keeping people separated in terms of where they're working, it means that our 2 shifts are 7 to 3 and 10 till 6, which I think for a long-term implementation, that's really quite workable. I mean, it's quite difficult to get lab workers to sort of be working till 10 o'clock at night, I would say, for any length of time. So I guess the next thing to look at is looking at what it means for the staff when all they're doing is going to work. I mean, we have some people who are single and they live alone, and all they do is they go to work and they come home. And I mean, our staff get along very well, but I mean, it is the type of workplace where people basically come to work and they work until they go home. So there's not hours of sitting around chatting. So, I mean, how do we deal with that? And I mean, the other thing to remember is that we have to make this a low stress situation. We can't have our staff under stress. I mean, stress can be positive in terms of productivity, and it keeps people alert and interested. But the point is it can only be for a short period of time. So this actually has to be a holding pattern. You know, we don't really know what's happening into the future. I mean, it's conceivable if we did lose half our staff from a positive case, then the other half is going to have to be carrying 100% of the weight. And the other possibility is we don't know what we might have to do in the months ahead. We might find that all of a sudden dozens of manufacturing sites are gearing up to manufacture something new. So your staff have to be ready to be able to lift their game as is required. So part of it is we've actually introduced socialising at work. So for 2 hours on Monday now, they actually eat pizza and play Jenga. So Maybe an unusual thing to do, but this is probably the only time that they actually have a laugh with a few people and the people that they work with. So hopefully that makes it sustainable. Okay, and then the final thing is this idea of what opportunities are there out there for people at the moment. I mean, there's, for small businesses, and I'd have to say not even particularly small businesses, they go up for businesses up to 500 million turnover. So some of these actually apply to everybody. But I mean, a small business offering cash grants of 20 to 100,000, and if you employ 20 staff, you're probably going to get $100,000 cash from the government. So you do have the opportunity to really invest back in the business. And the other thing at the moment is some of the human resources are available that aren't usually available. I mean, IT, we could never get good IT support for years. I mean, when we looked at our Part 11 compliance, what we thought should have taken months ended up taking, 3 or 4 years, simply because we couldn't get the IT support. But the thing is now is that we all know IT people out there, really good IT people who need work. So use it as an opportunity. I mean, imagine if you're a small lab with 3 or 4 HPLCs, which are all not networked, local audit trails, local access control. I mean, you can achieve compliance, but it's difficult. Why not go and put the service system in, get the IT in there, so that when you come back, you've actually got scalable capacity. So I think maybe it's time to sort of walk into that general manager's office and say, look, this is what I think we should do. And instant asset write-off is huge, 150,000 per item. So you can really go out and get some equipment. And luckily, maybe your employer won't have to pay any tax at all if you buy enough. So, okay, so just finally, I guess conclusions, it's implement, observe, adapt. I mean, that's what we were doing. That's how we've come to the systems that we've got in place at the moment. We're all learning, and let's hope that we never actually have to use these. These are actually never serving a purpose. But I mean, before, it's just so good to think that you're overreacted rather than wondering whether we should all done more. So good luck to all and stay safe. Just a thanks to Catherine, who put together a large part of the plan. Also Jennifer, because I did call Jennifer saying, what are you doing? You must know what's going on overseas. And also Mark, who's our accountant, who put together some numbers for what's going on with government assistance. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Alan. That was great. Excellent. What we'll do now is hopefully everybody can kind of see us on the screen. I don't, please do send questions via the Q&A area if you have questions specifically for the group. A bit lacking in questions, don't be shy. But I do have some pre-prepared that were provided beforehand. So it was, one of the things was touched upon was, by one of the speakers earlier was, do you foresee that you will continue with any of the introduced practices when normality returns? And what would they be, and which ones would you discard? Are there's some things you think you're going to carry on in your businesses?
Yeah, maybe I can kick off with that one. What we've realised, certainly working in a global business and a business that had a lot of internal and local and international travel, is that we can actually do meetings virtually, and we don't need to jump on a plane all the time just to go and visit people. So one thing that we'll be very much continuing is these nice, short, sharp, really to the point virtual meetings where we can actually get a lot done. It's amazing when we are pushed into a position of using digital technologies where we can actually learn and grow and develop from it.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I think, Rebecca, we were heavy users of Travellers, before this. I think And we've been trying to manage a building program interstate at the moment, fitting out a new lab, and I thought that was going to be a near impossible project to do remotely. But you know, between FaceTime, Zoom, and Skype for Business, I think we've been able to do nearly everything we needed to. I'll let everyone know how the remote TGA audit goes next week. Or maybe the TGA they might have something to say about that as well. But yeah, it's been a big change for us, and I think we've definitely seen the value in terms of just condensing those work programs.
Actually, on that note, there's a question specifically for you, Jennifer, about how is the TGA audit going to happen? Are you walking around with a tablet or a GoPro on your head or something?
Yeah, so basically we had a meeting with them today, just because they've obviously they're pretty busy themselves in terms of, you know, supporting efforts in Canberra to make sure everyone's making good decisions. But you know, GMP compliance needs to keep going on. We're trying to open a new facility, you know, and they understand that we need to be there. We need to stay open and active for our customers. But yeah, so we've run down through a few communication strategies with them today. We've sent them a whole lot of video files of walking around, and then as we go through the 4-day audit, we've got a number of sort of scheduled catch-ups. We've submitted documents onto a file exchange for them, and yeah, we'll see how it goes. But I mean, it's never going to be the same as, you know, standing in front of an instrument and looking at a printout and how that data gets handled. But I think maybe we're fortunate we're having an inspector who is familiar with our business, so they understand the way that we operate and can probably you know, readily know where to look for the information.
No, that's good. That's good. We've got a question come through from Wahib. Thanks, Wahib. Big involvement in RACI over the years, Wahib. You know, talking about as we work for organisations that provide service to clients, he wants to get an idea of regarding what your clients and contacts have been saying in regards to business getting back to normal, or as normal as things can be in Australia. So wanted to get an idea of regards to how you're getting back to normal, or when you're getting back to normal, I think. Yeah. So I don't think I read that very well. I
guess for us, AstraZeneca, for us, I mean, this is the norm for now. So we're trying to adapt to that, and until the government changes their rules and that, it's business as usual for us, and this is the norm in the current environment.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough.
I guess one of the questions that we have is, at what point do we stop splitting people into shifts? Like, do we continue that on until there's a vaccine, or do we suddenly get to the point where there's such low level of transmission that we can say, okay, we don't have to do this anymore? But I guess there's no real answer to that. We'll just have to work that out as time goes on.
Yeah, there's just no end date at the moment, is there? So we just carry on until we're told any different, or the rules change tomorrow. So, Alan, people are worried about how you play social distancing Jenga. So we're just trying to work that out. It looked like a big Jenga you were using there. So
it was, yeah. I mean, we do maintain distancing in the lab. I mean, one of the things we do is when we change shifts, they actually change instruments. We have dedicated instruments, so they're all sort of sitting 1.5 metres apart generally, but it is a little bit, I mean, it almost falls into one of those situations where the government says that in some instances when using equipment, it's difficult to actually maintain that. It does look like they were possibly sneaking up a little bit close there. We're thinking somebody's going to say that.
It's the angle.
Yeah, I think so. They're just trying to see if they can move that piece or not. That was all.
It's also just they are only for one group. You see, that's the thing, is that there's no whole company thing. I mean,
No.
these activities are all done by. I mean, if we bring cake in, they're sort of different cakes are brought for the different groups, so there's no contacting. You know, they divided us up in four groups, and I was told that I was in a group on my own and therefore couldn't talk to anyone.
They sent you home.
Yeah.
You don't have to share your cake.
Benefits. There was a question about supply chain issues and delays and things like that. So, like basically, if you have to do different routes and different supply chain routes and things like that, you know, what's the impact on kind of validation status for transport of medicinal products and things? Is that impacted?
So maybe I can start with that one. So of course, there's obviously approvals that need to be done from an importation point of view from Australia. So that's not so determined on which routes we use. However, it's more around access and availability. So obviously, as I said, for our business, we certainly use a lot of passenger aircraft, and there's been a significant drop. You know, in the first couple of weeks of March, I think there was 50% reduction. And I heard Singapore Airlines has grounded 96% of their airlines, or their aircraft. So when you've got that much pressure put on a network, it certainly becomes an issue of availability. Obviously, you need to get creative. So it's what backups are there, what shipping routes might be there, which then is coming down to the delays. Obviously, in Australia, it's really what we do from a domestic point of view. We were really heartened when the government put some money to both Qantas and Virgin to continue the interstate routes that we need. So at least we can, after getting it into Australia, we feel we're comfortable about being able to transport it around the country. But it's really keeping, you know, very close contacts with our relevant departments around our permits and our licenses and how we manage those. It's certainly one of those ever evolving things, and I know our supply chain teams are working pretty hard here and overseas to try and get this working. I guess the one thing is we're all in it together. I mean, it's every country all around the world, and I think there's a willingness and a drive to try to find some solutions, and there's a recognition that this is really, as much as I don't like to use the word, this is unprecedented. That I think there's some I guess acceptance that nothing's perfect, but I think we're trying to provide what we can.
Yeah, definitely. There's a question. I'm not sure if we can cover it or not, but we'll have a go. So it's what we think our opinion is about the COVID-19 vaccine. There's a feeling there's a bit of commercial competition out there and people aren't totally collaborating. I don't know if we have an opinion or we have any facts around that in the room. Well, not in the room, in our rooms, I should say.
I guess the only opinion we can offer up is what we read in the newspaper, and
yeah.
My impression is that different research groups are coming at it from quite a different direction. So I think it's encouraging that a lot of different strategies are being used. So I think that's a bit of a furphy saying that it's a dilution of capability.
It's certainly going to be an interesting one because I work for a large organisation and we struggle to talk to each other across labs, let alone across companies. So, you know, there's some trials in Oxford, I think, in the UK at the moment. There's plenty of other stuff going on. So I'm sure there's people trying to talk to each other as much as they can. We're all in it together, aren't we? So hopefully that's there. Rebecca, have you mentioned the vaccine stuff? Have you heard anything at all about on that side or not at all?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think what you said was right. I think there are some laboratories, some organisations that are collaborating very closely. Obviously, we've had CEPI, who has put a lot of funding into a range of different laboratories and research institutions around the world. I think what I have seen is definitely an intention and a willingness, because It's like all things, if we pool resources, we hopefully can solve things faster. But there's also different mechanisms by which we are looking at generating vaccines. And I think it's really trying to be able to share some of those learnings and those understandings so that we can accelerate it. Certainly a company like us, we're really looking at how do we pull things together, how do we plug things together, how do we enable, how do we connect people, so our team's certainly keeping track of what vaccines are being developed around the world and what type of technology is in there to ensure that we can help and we can support. I think whichever comes first, it's I think maybe there are a multitude of solutions that work in different areas. I think you just have to look at recovery rates in different countries to see that the way countries are from a health perspective looking after people that are infected, it varies from country to country. Different drugs being used by different health departments and different doctors. So I think, look, it's an all-in approach. I think while we could get cynical, I think there is some good opportunity, and given the level of awareness and I guess priority for Australia, this is a really exciting time. I was referencing back, I'm a chemist myself, and I was referencing back to my family saying, I don't think I've ever seen as many scientists on television than we've had in the last few months. This is fantastic. What a great achievement for the STEM movement. It's a good time.
Now you've got to try and take some positives out of anything you can get at the moment, don't you? So like it was good to see with Alan talking about some of the things you can improve and do for the future and things like that as well, because otherwise it's all doom and gloom, isn't it? So that's all good.
Scott, I'd like to add something here. This is Helena. So just to give a little bit of context, I am an account manager working for Merck, and I haven't had the chance to meet Rebecca yet. For example, she mentioned that she started with us 5 weeks ago, and we haven't had the chance to work together, I'd say, on a face-to-face level yet. But I'd like to add something on what Rebecca is mentioning. Is from an account manager perspective, I personally look after the territory of Queensland and New South Wales in Australia from a process solution team. And what I have seen happening around the COVID-19 vaccine initiative that are done in Australia is, since all this started, I have been working even more with my counterparts in Melbourne that are also having some involvement around it. And we see collaboration happening from some research institute and some of the commercial entities. And that also has brought us together as a team to be able to deliver the best we can for our customer all across Australia. And we've developed some further collaboration among our international team to serve better the external partners. So there is collaboration happening. I see it myself from a field perspective, if I may say.
That's excellent. Thank you. Thank you for that. Moving on to our next question. So you've got a question around basically about, we're not going to be able to manufacture everything in Australia, but we need to manufacture the things we need. So has anybody strategized around, if borders completely shut down and you can't get anything from abroad, that we can't make anything, that we might, I don't know if we'll go back to how it used to be 20, 30 years ago with a lot of pharmaceutical manufacture in Australia, but will we start to see more done locally, do we think? Or is it too, or are we too far gone to bring that back in line or bring back into Australia?
I mean, if I could add, it's interesting, the perspective of everyone. We're really talking about, when they talk about the deficiencies in the industry, it tends to be about the PPE. I'd have to say that in the pharmaceutical space, we have quite a lot of capacity locally. I think manufacture of actives, I'm sure people can add a fair bit to this. I mean, it's hard to imagine every country in the world manufacturing every active. So I guess globalization is always going to be here. But how to really change anything, I don't know. I mean, I suppose you could change maybe some zonings on industrial land to sort of make it easier to set up pharmaceutical companies. But aside from that, it's really hard to see how you can unwind globalization.
Did anybody else have a comment on that one or not?
Yeah, I wanted to weigh in on that. I think there will be some degree of rethinking some of the supply chains that we have in place. And I guess it comes down to where we have a reliance on one particular location. I see this opportunity, and what people are looking for now is those diversified supply chains, making sure there are serious backup plans in place and proper backups in place. I think for Australia, we've seen, some, certainly in the PPE space, some companies really step up, whether that's around face masks or ventilators, and be able to drive those very quickly, ramping up production in Australia. I think if we look at, this is going back a couple of governments now, the sort of science agenda that's been on the table, and certainly around advanced manufacturing, there are some really fantastic opportunities that creates for Australia, given our size, our population size is small. We don't need to go for such large scale processes that maybe exist elsewhere. That's where I think some opportunities might come. It was interesting to hear the other day that the Morrison government is looking for some change in strategy. So I don't know how many of you out there know the Dow Chemical Company, but their ex-CEO Andrew Liveris has just been asked to lead the charge on what does Australian manufacturing look like in the future. I think that's a really exciting project, and you will know that Andrew Liveris is an Australian guy based in Brisbane, but he led the Dow company for a number of years globally out of the US. And certainly was a part of the Obama and Trump administration's support on that chemical manufacturing industry. So I think there is a drive to do so. We've certainly, as we know, have some challenges here in Australia around energy and around our labour structure. We have a high manufacturing cost base, which is something that probably won't change. But if we can leverage out some of these advanced technologies that are there, that's where I see the opportunities for Australia. And if companies are willing to diversify their supplier base, then that will be another drive to change things. So perhaps I'm a little of an optimist, but I see some opportunities here if we can take some learnings from this situation, is really how do we have those proper backups in place?
Yeah, because I think it's that long-term side, isn't it? Because short-term, like you say, people have stepped up. It's not an Australian thing, but a friend of mine works for an engine manufacturer, and they made ventilators because they could do sheet metal work and retooled. And the morale through that place for a couple of days when they made some ventilators was obviously fantastic. But that's a short-term thing. They're not going to do that forever, are they? So it'll be interesting what does happen in the future. Jennifer, there was one regarding the shutdown of the clinical labs and the clinical trial labs. So what do you think needs to change to for them basically be open where members of the public come into the lab?
Yeah,
or does it depend what state it's in?
Oh, maybe it's one of our customers that have had their work delayed who's asking. I really do think it's going to come down to the local government directives in terms of relaxing the social distancing rules and recommendations. That was certainly where we took our lead from. That, if the government's recommending people don't go in to get their eyebrows done, then it's difficult for us to justify why we're going to be face-to-face examining, whether someone's wrinkles are better after a week of using the new cream. So I think in terms of the cosmetic clinical evaluation laboratories and the sunscreen testing labs came into that as well here in Australia. They were, one of our first operations that we shut that down. We couldn't risk our staff because we just couldn't put the appropriate distancing measures between the test subject and our staff. So I think until the government sort of says, we don't see a perceivable risk in terms of doing those sorts of activities and start shaking hands, then that's probably when we'll open them up. I think the clinical trials, in terms of participating, you know, in new drug trials, I think that's quite a different conversation. Not all of those have stopped, but certainly there's been a significant disruption to a lot of them. And again, I think, you know, it's going to come down to what the health authorities are saying in terms of recommendations for patients to either leave their house or potentially to, you know, to be enrolling in a therapy where we've got some unknown outcomes. And whilst there's a real risk in terms of acquiring infections, people don't, you know, see the benefit for the risk at the moment.
Yeah, thank you for that. Rebecca, you know, picking on you for Merck being a big business here. So with a large sales force, how is the difficulty when you can't go and visit anybody? What's the challenge there? Well, you don't even meet your own team. You know, you can't even go and meet the people you work with, let alone the clients.
So, and that's where we've really been leveraging the digital technologies that we have available to us. So we made it really clear to our sales teams that we wanted them to continue to contact customers. So where we're making phone calls, we're doing video chats, and I guess the change has become not only the technology change, but has also been, I guess, the approach. So pretty much the sales team's approach is really now, what can we do to support you through this? And it's a very different discussion, and it's been able to then build the closer bonds with our customers as well. So because we're all, as we know, we're all in this together, and it's a case of it's all new for everybody. So it's been very much around how do we use the best of the technology we have, how do we continue to make that contact. But obviously we know some parts of the industry are really, really, really busy. So ones that have been, you know, making hand sanitizers, really busy, you know, there's no chance we can get into even have a video chat with some people there. So it's really taking that approach of where we can support. And as I mentioned, the other thing we're doing is sort of like virtual webinars where we invite different companies to come on and just have a Q&A session. So I think we're trying to mix it up, do some different things. It's a time for our sales force to do some training. You know, it's pretty much we had to mobilize like everybody. We had to mobilize very, very quickly. It was actually my first day when I walked into the office. We just had a global directive come down that we were working from home. So I literally walked into a crisis meeting on how we could get everybody up and running at home. So we've been able to do that. And I think it was around, you know, what kind of crisis management we had in place and how quickly we were then able to enact that. You know, I'm sure there was some things that we would now go back and do differently. But it's a case of trying to adapt and trying to change. It's not perfect. And I think while we'll take some learnings from this, I think it also makes us appreciate, and we do have the opportunity to have a face-to-face visit, I think we're all going to really feel very differently about shaking someone's hand, and just that connection about shaking someone's hand is going to have a very different meaning to us all.
Yes, I think so. I think so. And this could be for Jennifer, Rebecca, or Gary, really, I suppose. For the big international organisations, where you speak across borders and countries and things, do you think there's more camaraderie now that you're doing more of these chats? Are the meetings better, worse, different? You know, are you getting up at midnight because head office is in the US? You know, how does it work?
Absolutely. So, there is.
I live in that world. It's always me. That's fine.
There's no such thing as a 9 to 5 anymore, but no, it's great. I mean, all the people pulling together. So we're helping. So the Chinese we were helping the Chinese actually when we were sending masks and PPE to them when the outbreak started there. But now they are helping us now. So yeah.
Is there more communication than there ever used to be, do you think, between the groups? Yeah,
yes.
okay.
Yes.
No, that's good. That's good.
Now, one thing that we've actually started to do is to try and instill virtual drink sessions. Again, it's just about having a bit of fun around this. So yeah, wearing different, you know, we'll have a theme day, wearing a hat or something, but it's finding those opportunities to connect on a different level. Obviously, we can't do this face to face. So it's finding some unique ways to have a bit of fun at the same time.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, like I think that's the thing. I've tried to, in my personal life, connect with a few people that I don't speak to as often as I should. But it's difficult if you don't have a subject that you just talk about COVID-19 all for the whole conversation, don't you? Which is no fun either. So, yeah, maybe have a game of bingo or something. I don't know. We'll have a go. So I do have another one here. So, are there any follow-up on the ongoing researches in Australia by the TGA? Is there anything we know about going on with the TGA? Anything different? Anything going on around COVID? I don't know if we'd know in the room, really. I don't know if that'd be something we'd know.
I'm curious as to, does anyone know what the TGA is really up to at the moment? I dare say they're busy trying to...
planning our audit.
But the auditors travel an awful lot, don't they? Normally, they're out the country for very big chunks of time. So you know, they're trying to learn how to remote audit, like you say. So I keep imagining there was a program called Gadget Man on last night where they have a tablet on two wheels that wheels round the shop kind of thing and follows you around. So it could be like that, but maybe we don't have the money for that. Let me just have a quick look, see if we got any others we haven't really covered off on. You know, I think you touched on it, Alan, really around social distancing. Someone mentioned, like, if you've got a small lab or a facility, you know, shifts, test scheduling, social distancing, how is that done? Is that like what you've got with one person walking down the stairs at the time, you know, splitting your shifts right up into small groups, that type of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I guess trying to keep the different groups separate. I mean, there's the, in their workplaces, I guess there's some, I mean, obviously someone touches something and they're in the same group, it's practically impossible to just run around constantly cleaning. But it's when we change over the shifts is where we put the most effort in. I think as far as the admin areas, the challenge is that places where people intermingle. I mean, initially we had some arrangements like where people collected samples, and then you realise that in order to collect the samples, they had to walk into another workplace, and inevitably you ended up with a crowd forming. So, you know, we had to trolley out the sample cupboard and put it somewhere else. I mean, it was in this particular place because of the security reasons, but of course, when you've got your front door permanently locked, it's sort of some of your access controls are actually a little bit different because people don't have any access to the building. So I think there's the splitting the shifts, I guess, is the important one, and I think the fact that we have shared write-up areas is probably, I mean, we have a 30-minute clean down between people moving in, and that's actually worked well. And if there's anything that you'd say we would consider doing more of, is that anyone who ever's run a lab, the lab work can be the easy part to get done. It's the writing up that can be the difficult part. So it seems to be working quite nicely, having people only allowed in the lab for 5 hours, and then having to go and sit down for 2.5 hours and do all those other things that need to be done.
Have you noticed that the chemists have started being a bit tidier? Because sometimes they can be a little bit on the messy side on the bench if they brought their game up. Microbiologists have to do this; they've always had to do this, but
it looks sparkling. I mean, years ago you used to say the Pons Institute, but I think now the gold standard is more NCI, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. That's good. One question raised was, have people seen, you know, higher sick rates, even non-COVID, where people are not coming to work or worried to come to work, that type of thing? And have you seen that as a problem on site? Anxiety is high, obviously, in the public.
Yeah, I think initially we certainly did. You know, when the initial advice come out, you know, if anyone's got a cough, a sneeze, a itchy throat, then you know, they were staying away from the workplace simply because you couldn't get access to tests at that point, you know, given the scarcity of them and you know, the desire to limit the access of those to high risk people who had travelled or been in contact. So initially, I think everyone was very conservative, you know, in terms of their own health and out of respect to their colleagues. And we were certainly very vigilant in the workplace. If someone sneezed, they were sent off site, regardless of whether it was because of dust or anything else. So, but I think now it certainly seems to have settled in our operations. I don't know whether the others are seeing the same thing.
Yeah, I do agree with Jen there. Our very similar as well. So people, if we showing signs of any flu or whatever, they're basically told to go home and work from home. But even from our operators, we haven't seen any, I guess, increase in absenteeism or anything like that. So it's been very good.
No, that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
I suppose from us, you see the sickness seems to almost disappear. I mean, the fact that people aren't actually interacting with each other.
Yeah.
And of course, no one's going on holidays. So, I mean, people have booked overseas holidays. So, I mean, we have 100% of the staff here all of the time. Fantastic. Yeah. Yeah, it's not really had that sort of effect on us. So.
With what's been said by the others, but I think it's also one of the reasons is because we're ourselves more vigilant. You know, I think the washing your hands has been so well portrayed throughout the media and within organisations that we're also being cleaner. But it certainly has been from the very start our advice to our staff: if you don't feel well, stay at home. But we've had a working from home. It's really, we're not seeing any absenteeism or anything that's coming along. I think people have been able to adjust, and I think because people are not going out so much themselves, that they don't have that exposure. I mean, coming into that winter period where we're headed, I would hope that we stay the same. But I think certainly the washing hands has really made a big difference.
Yeah, I suppose maybe if none of us go out, we don't need the flu vaccine or something. I don't know. More chance of getting it by getting the flu vaccine. But anyway. I shouldn't joke. Sorry.
If there is one thing, I guess the only thing where you see interruption is with the schools. I mean, I do appreciate the efforts to keep the schools open, because that can be a real issue. It's been easier in New South Wales, but Victoria, it's really quite difficult having people work from home when they've also got, you know, a couple of kids that they're looking after at the same time. So it's, I mean, you appreciate that they're open, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. And from the financial side, financial pressures have, you know, it doesn't sound like we're doing too bad here, but have we got reduced hours and forced leave and long service leave and things like that, or government grants are they coming through, that type of thing? Has that been a big concern or a big thing that's been chewing up time?
I think no, you go, Rebecca.
I was going to say, we had one of our businesses were particularly impacted over in New Zealand, actually, and I must say the government has been very, very quick to respond over in New Zealand in terms of, you know, their wage subsidy. You know, the difference between New Zealand and Australia is once that was announced over in New Zealand, you know, the application was in and the money was in the bank accounts of the staff a week later. But over in Australia, you know, we're reading these reports where particularly small businesses have been impacted, and, you know, they may have had a few sort of part-time staff. They've actually got to stump up the cash to pay the staff at that wage subsidy at the moment, and some of them just simply don't have the cash to do that. So yeah, I mean, that's been a real surprise, just in terms of how quickly I think the New Zealand government responded there.
I guess our point of view is it definitely costs more to run the business in these times. So, I mean, we just accept that our costs are going up, and there's also been quite a significant amount of, well, spending on just IT. I mean, you really want to make sure that there's enough laptops around that are all networked, installed, ready, so people can switch to work from home if they have to. But we're actually running more staff. I mean, we have about, we have 2 IT professionals working with us, upgrading our LIMS and building a web interface. So that's what we've done. And part of it is, I guess, with the government money, it takes the risk away. You just know that you're not sure about the future, but it takes that, it means you don't really feel the need to stop trying to do more and improve systems. So it's been quite the opposite for us, really.
No, that's good.
And the same has been for us. So we're seeing increased workloads across our customer service teams. As I said, our sales teams are still there and trying to contact customers to offer support. And yeah, it's been a really unusual situation where we see a lot of businesses struggling. So we're trying to do our part in terms of what we can do to support our staff. Whereas I see on our healthcare side of the business, the side of the business is supplying drugs, particularly into fertility and oncology. They've really seen, up until the recent announcement, because of elective surgery, they've really seen a slowdown in business. So in that business, one of the, I guess, unique things they tried to do, and especially in their sales teams, were offered extra charity leave. So as a big company, we offer charity leave for you to take a day off and visit or support a charity. And it was really well accepted by the teams that had that spare capacity and spare time, that it's something that you can do to give back, I guess, in these times where we're feeling, as people, sometimes a little lost. Being able to go and help others does bring a sense of purpose.
No, definitely. I've got a question around, and I don't know much about this stuff, but the intention to implement like a disinfection chambers or tunnels for personnel, like chlorine dioxide and hydrogen peroxide, alcohol-based sanitizer. Anybody heard of these things for safety? Some of them sound nasty, but
yeah, we've been pretty active in terms of receiving some new and very unusual inventions for evaluation. In our labs, we use a surrogate virus, a coronavirus, not the coronavirus, but a different one. It infects mice, not humans. Yeah, so we've been running some assays on some weird and wonderful products that customers are exploring the potential of in terms of disinfection.
are you companies putting in place any special programs to manage the potential effect of COVID-19 on employees' mental health? And maybe continuing after COVID-19, that they're in the greater public, there is a worry of all those horrible things that might happen if you're stuck indoors in dysfunctional families and things. So is there anything that's happened already in your businesses?
Yeah, for us, we rolled out some what we call lunch and learn sessions. So each day there's lunch and learn sessions that you can dial in, and work-life balance and stuff, your mental health and all that. It helps the employees who are interested in all that. So yeah.
Good.
Yeah, we've been working with our employee assistance program provider to do exactly that. As well, we've seen some value in having just these sort of coffee catch-ups and drinks with different parts of our team and our business, just to take that time away from the everyday looking through emails, making phone calls, video chats, just to sit back and share stories and talk about what's going on for us. And I think it's a big thing at the moment around how we take care of people that especially that we don't see them, and how do we ensure that their work setup is right and suitable, and not only physically from an ergonomic point of view, but also how they're coping with it. So we've been giving lots of advice on how to take a break and making sure you plan breaks in your day, just so that you can have that time to down tools essentially and have that mental break, because while certainly a lot of our field sales force are used to working alone, obviously, not in the office, we have quite a big office-based staff. And for those people who are used to coming in and that physical connection, that's where it's really hard. So those small catch-ups really make a big difference.
Rebecca, if I could ask, one of the things about social interaction is that when you sort of mentioned like catch-up drinks or coffee or something, is that actually during work time? Because, okay, yep, so, because that's really...
Yeah, so we just, 10:30, and part of it's been, I've been trying to introduce myself to the business. So I've instigated a coffee catch-up where the business jumps on. It's a Q&A session. Any question is open, whatever you'd like to know about the business, what's happening, about me, especially being new to the organisation. And I think it's been really well attended. I think people in these times crave information and communication, and I've seen in not similar times, but in times of crisis where we're really pushed to the limit, it's really having some information and some knowledge kind of makes us feel a bit better. I think that's why we're all tuning in to watch the Prime Minister's announcements that kind of happened a lot in March, because we're all just craving that information to feel some sort of sense of security and a sense of certainty. So that's been my, I guess, intention of what I'm trying to do with the business. And look, I think it's just trying to find different ways that you can connect with people over this time.
The more a comment than a question, really. Thank you, Jürgen, for putting this forward. It basically saying that MQB is busy developing virtual and desktop audits for local inspections. Version 14 of the PICS code of the GMP will be implemented from mid-year, most likely July. So there'll be some more guidelines there on the exact parts of it. So that's good. And then Jürgen's got another question, which is great. So any suggestions on how small companies without multinational leverage should manage logistics and minimize delays to their clinical development programs?
I would say it's around having good partnerships, and it's really leveraging on those partners that are there for us at the time. And I think when we have uncertain times, it's having those discussions with your partners to understand what your needs are, what they're capable of doing. Obviously, like at the moment, everyone is looking for supply, and there's obviously a lot of lack of capacity in that space right now. But I think it comes down to, and what we could take from this going forward, is how we select our partners. And it comes back a little bit to what I was saying about the manufacturing situation, that supply reliability and supply security, right now it's showing how important that is. And that we just pick partners that are not just picked from a cost point of view. We have to look at those probably hidden costs that we don't see, that today we're probably seeing, because everywhere freight has gone up in terms of cost. But having those strong partnerships that can help us through at these times. As I mentioned when I presented at Merck, we do really take this responsibility that we have quite seriously. And we want to make sure that coming through this, we've built some more stronger partnerships with our customers, with our suppliers, with our stakeholders, because it's in these times where I think you get a sense of what the company's about. And I think this is a time when we can all demonstrate what are our values and what are we really here to do. And that's, for me, it's always been the way I've tried to manage business, that at the end of the day, we're dealing with people. And if we are working together collaboratively and really looking for the same goal, then it's, I don't have any perfect answers for how do you find those supply chain solutions, but leverage the partners that you've got, and reach out to other companies. There's many companies out there that are in that supply chain space, that are certainly looking for business and focused on business and really delivering what they can. So I hope that helps.
I think it does. Right, we are at 5 o'clock, which is the scheduled end of our webinar. Is there any last comments or questions from the panel before we sign off? Obviously, thank you very much for turning up and helping me out and all of this. It's been wonderful. Thank you. Anything you wanted to ask each other? Last comments before we sign off?
I think for me, just thanks for the opportunity to come and speak to this group, and please everybody stay safe.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all again. Thank you everybody for attending, and thank you for giving your opinions and how it's all happening in your businesses. And as you just rightly put, everybody stay safe.